We are now going to move to a session where we are going to discuss redefining patient engagement, and we're going to explore innovative models of collaboration. Now, with this session, we don't have an input speaker. We just have the panel and you. And there's fewer of you than before lunch, so you will have to work harder. But that's normal, because it's a conversation about engagement and innovative models of collaboration. So can I invite my panel members to come and join us so we can discuss this issue? So we have Annette Bakker, President and Chief Scientific Officer for the Children's Tumor Foundation. We have James Cusack, the Director of Research for Autistica. Matthias Gottwald, the Head of R&D Policy and Networking for Bayer. Olivier Arnaud, Senior Director for European Research at the JDRF International, which is the Junior Diabetes Research Foundation. And Len Wenhua, the Director for Patient and Disease Foundations Network, the Structural Genomics Consortium for the University of Oxford, and also an IMI project, the Ultra DD. So welcome, panel members. Maybe what the first thing I should ask you to think about is, if the title is Innovative Models of Collaboration, what do we actually mean by innovative? Because Dominique set us up right at the beginning of the day by saying how far we've come in the last 12 or 14 years, but how much further do we need to go? The battle to get patients in the door is done. The battle to get patients at the table is done, or even to have a say. But there's a difference between being consulted and being allowed to say something and having a real meaningful role. And the European Patients Forum makes this very strong point, that it's meaningful patient engagement that matters. So, when we say innovative models, what are we looking for? What does that mean? Who in the panel would like to kick us off by what they mean by innovative? Yes.
Okay, what is innovative model? I think this morning and also yesterday we hear a lot about what have advanced. It was very significant things which have been said. However, perhaps now it's time also for practical and where we are now really and how we do. So I would speak more about operational things and how we are now. For example, at GDRF, which is a patient foundation, US Patient Research Foundation, so funding project, we entered into the IMI because it was very innovative, so it's more than 5 years ago. And now it's really positive. Yesterday I've been presented the study in diabetes type 1, which is in India, where patients are really present and with different aspects of what we could say innovative approach, which put in place what have been said before. We try to. On the paper, it's some work packages, it's a patient committee, but in reality, we try to really set up something which is more a platform and really a reference, also how patient can be an actors inside. So perhaps I will speak of that later.
Certainly. Maybe I could just press you a little bit, because the title of your organization is the Junior Diabetes Research Foundation. So when we talk about the issue of patients in this particular area, are you defining patients as the children, their families and carers? How do you deal with this issue of, meaningful patient engagement when they may be children or teenagers?
So first of all, it's not anymore in type 1 only children. The adults are growing very fast. And just as a sign, usually we use in the past, it was Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, indeed. But now we are always speaking of GDRF, because it's also adults. And for example, in the study we are setting, it's not only children, it's also patients which are adult, more and more.
Okay. This is a question I might also address to James, because you're dealing with a patient organisation, Autistica, but obviously autism and autism spectrum disorders are usually diagnosed in childhood. So again, there is this issue of patient engagement that also involves the younger populations.
Yeah, so I think one of the challenges with autism is that it's so varied in terms of outcomes and in terms of what people want from research. And so engaging any population with autism and reaching any consensus with regards to what outcome you want from autism research is actually quite challenging. In terms of engaging with children, we're beginning to take some steps towards doing that. So I think autism research has had to do a lot of soul searching over the last 5 years in terms of really explaining to the community that we serve why autism research can be truly impactful for them and really transform their lives. Because I think that we've been somewhat guilty of making a range of assumptions, so thinking things like everyone with autism wants a cure, and that's simply not the case. Actually, different people want different things from autism research, and I think it's been a bit of a theme from today that there's a real focus within autism research on things like co-occurring conditions, so things like managing anxiety and autism. So one way that we have engaged children it has been generally through parents, but we've also tried to make events more autism friendly, so ensuring that when you're engaging with the community, you're engaging with them on their terms, and also ensuring that you're not just asking them what their priorities are for autism research, but you're also involving them at all stages through the research process. And so we've set up in the UK an autism research network which allows that to happen. So it's not just a case of saying, what do you want research? It's then saying, okay, we're going to design this research. Does this sound like the sort of thing that you're wanting? And so we've began to host things like collaborative workshops. So we did one on mental health last month, and we got young autistic people, researchers, clinicians and caregivers in the room to really work together to develop not only research questions, but to go one step further and develop research projects. And what we're finding is the quality of solutions you get really does increase, because there's just that extra level of nuance that you don't get if you leave these parties to do it in isolation.
Okay, so when you would in your own mind define innovative, it includes this investment in building the relationships and bringing the patients in to define the questions and think about potential solutions.
Yeah, so one of the things which we constantly say again and again and again is, together we'll build long, happy, healthy lives for autistic people and their family members. And the idea is that you're really creating a culture where it's not researchers just doing it and it's not just participants. And we tend not to talk about patients, because culturally within autism research that wouldn't be acceptable. So we talk about people and about bringing people together. And you're a person if you're a researcher, you're a person if you're on the spectrum, you're a person if you're a parent. And by doing that, you remove those barriers and you create a sense of trust. And I think that's, in a way that is quite innovative, because I think that there still is a barrier which exists between research and the public. And by actually just saying, we're all people trying to improve outcomes and we need each other to do that, I think that's actually very powerful, and we've had a really enormously positive response over the last year when we began to do that.
Okay, thank you. Annette, maybe I can turn to you. The work your organisation does, how would you define innovative collaboration, and maybe any comments on things that you heard this morning?
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, I think innovation is a word that is used very often these days by many people, to the right, to the wrong. And I think the way we have defined innovation in our foundation is, especially with regards to patient engagement, is in fact the first thing we do is listen to our patients. What is it that you exactly want to do? What do you want the research community to do? And then in fact the innovation comes in is to make sure that we as an organization, as well as the patients, the researchers, the clinicians, we in fact invite everybody to step out of their comfort zone. And that is, I think, where the innovation comes. It's if you need to step out of your comfort zone because the current system is broke, then we should do that, and we should be ready to do that. And that is, I think, where the innovation comes in. And then the other thing that how we justify our innovative models is by saying, okay, and regularly evaluating what the value is. What is the value that what we're doing with the patients is giving to research, and what is the value that the research is giving back to the patients. And it's about what we discussed this morning. I think there were some very important topics brought up of reciprocity. And I can give one, you asked for failure, so I can give you a failure experiment here of we created a patient registry. We were all super excited about the patient registry because it was driven by the patients. They could answer their own questions, so we thought this is it. We had a relatively low recruitment percentage of people that wanted to sign up. So just to give you an idea, our foundation is focused on neurofibromatosis, 120,000 patients in the US. We have 8,000 patients in our registry, which is great, but it's only a percentage of the population. So one day we did an experiment and we said, and what if we give the patients that register an Amazon membership card, or an Amazon gift card, sorry. We had 50 patients that registered that day. So in fact, instead of 200 a month, we suddenly had 50 a day. That, I think, there comes the reciprocity that you brought up this morning, is how can we show our patients that in fact sharing their data is huge to drive a research agenda and to drive their better treatments as well. So that's kind of a question to our friend panelists as well, is how can we create an environment where our patients understand that sharing their data is not just something they do. They say that, yeah, we do it for you, Annette. And I'm like, no, you do it for yourself. And I think there is an educational element that I think you brought up this morning that is huge.
Lee, I see you nodding away there. And you're obviously someone who works with patients and needs to recruit them and involve them in research. Would you agree with what Annette just said?
Fully, completely agree with Annette. I think
Just because we love each other.
it's clearly, that's why I picked the seat. But what Annette said is absolutely right. I come to, I think, Julian's point earlier today.
Yeah.
Who should be leading? I think we all should be leading. We're in a different society nowadays. It's not a hierarchical system. We all have a voice. We all have a role. We all have a place to play. And that's what I would like to bring and share with you. What I think will be very innovative is actually harnessing what we already have in place by different sectors and building a new way, right? So one thing that all of our friends have said there, patients are volunteering their data, but are the scientists volunteering their research data back to the patients, right? And I would like to pick on that because we all heard about Web 2.0. Wow, seems big. Patient 2.0, yes. Is that enough? I would say no. I would say patient should not be what the word tells you to do. Wait and sit and be patient. I think we should be more and more impatient. And the way I spell impatient is I''am patient, because we'll all be patient one day, where disease or not. We should be thinking about this while we're still healthy and can contribute. And the way we think that the open access, the open source research can help, as what we've been doing here with the SUC and UltraDD, funded by the IMI, is saying to everyone, there are patients out there who would like to do more than just volunteer the data, who would like to do more than just saying, I would like to have research done this way or that way. We had a colleague earlier this morning say, I'm a biomedical researcher, but I'm also the mother of a patient. Yeah. What if we also empower this very select group of scientists who have a real motivation? And that is not skewed by what is perception of my research, what is my paper. They only want one thing, cure. What if we empower them with data and open up the doors of dialogue, also at scientific level? And that's only possible if you start sharing that data output out there, and more importantly, the tools to enable that research. Yeah, and we can come back to the point of sharing assets later on. But I think I've spoken too much, and Matthias.
I was going to say, I mean, this is an excellent point to go over to Matthias, representing an industry on this panel. We've talked about the need for, if we invite patients to volunteer their data and to participate, that researchers need to volunteer to share back and provide that data. Where does industry sit on this reciprocity carousel?
I think we are hopefully a well-accepted partner in the whole activity, and it has to be a joint activity. The awareness that this is necessary, I think, is there across all companies. There has been some uncertainty how to exactly do it, and Magda addressed it earlier this morning. This was one of the reasons why FPI has published an updated code of practice on how to interact, how to involve patients in every step of research and development, and what are the do's, what are the don'ts, like clarity of purpose, so to explain exactly what we discussed, explain why this data collection, this kind of clinical trial is currently planned to be done, and check if this is really meeting the needs. Transparency, to openly make clear what the interaction is about, and so that nobody can accuse something that is done behind the scenes. Conflict of interest aspects, independence, ensure the independence of the patient organization. So these are the how to do things, and I think they are necessary to be worked on jointly so that everybody feels comfortable in quickly entering a new dialogue, a new collaboration. And I think we have good examples in the IMI environment. Olivier mentioned projects with U-Party, which is very close to my heart because I've been there from the first minute. And I love that project, Nicola knows. I think it was a very good example of building this multi-stakeholder platform where we used, I would say, the first year to really test, can I really trust the others? How is it working with industry? How is it working with the regulators and others? And we all found out this is a perfect opportunity to bring the different perspectives together. And the IMI, from my perspective, is one of the very rare, maybe the unique platform where you can bring in all the parties. Academia, industry, that worked before. But also then the patient organizations, the regulators, the HTA people, so all the relevant ones, and to speak openly. And I think this is something we should continue, and we should have more, and we should have it also as good as possible on the national level, where I see one of the big hurdles. Because when we tried to implement the U-Party philosophy, this multi-stakeholder dialogue platform in the various countries, we had countries where it worked without thinking. In Ireland, they had trained it 10 years already. They have IPOSI, they have a platform where with governmental funding, the different stakeholders work together and discuss how to improve the healthcare environment. And we have other countries like my own, Germany, where we have a bit more problems because there is, so to say at least, this pharma-skeptical view on these whole developments, and also on initiatives like U-Party. And I think we have to think about how to overcome this on the national level. And then we have two other aspects we are, I think, are aware of, but not yet at the end. One is the implementation of this philosophy across the whole environment, so that everybody not even have to think about it, but everybody automatically sees and looks for the opportunity to involve the patient in the activities. We just today submit a full proposal for a new IMI project, hopefully starting early next year, where we exactly look at this broader implementation. So where we want to look at what is already there, guidelines, good examples of patient involvement, along the whole chain. So from setting research priorities, discussing what a new research project should look like, through clinical trial design, how to make sure that this exactly happens, what Annette said, that recruitment really takes place because it is smartly designed jointly. The question is delivered in an understandable way, why are we doing that, and then to get the buy-in. And up to early dialogue on HTA. And we hope we will have all the relevant partners on board, and then to see what is there, what is needed, to develop better guidances, to have a broad platform of best practice examples, which hopefully then will help to implement it also in the companies, because they then easily understand why is this not only socially necessary, but also a return on investment because things get faster and are more efficient. Okay. So still a way in front of us, but I think we have good starting points.
So thank you for your first inputs, and I'm going to put a challenge to the panel members, which is we heard from Sue earlier about the experience from Leeds where they went out into the community and engaged with the black and ethnic minority community that is not normally in, say, organised patient groups. So if we've opened the door to organised patient groups, and that's fantastic, what do we do in an innovative way to make sure the people who are coming in are representative of the broader population, particularly subpopulations that may not be already active in other forms of dialogue? Any member of the panel want to suggest? Annette?
So one of the things that we've been doing over the last years now is really involve our patients, empower our patients to be part. So they drive the research agenda, they are on our review committees, they drive the clinical endpoints as well, so patient-reported outcomes. All our patients are, or all our patients, a subclass of our patients are part of those patient-reported outcomes. And in fact, I think to come back to talk to that point, but also to come back to the earlier point, I think we should be really good at marketing that, in fact, all these great things where we really have patients that are part of the research community and that are really participating in research, that at the end of the day, that also gives value back to the researchers. For example, our patient community has been pushing us as a foundation to organize a body donation program. So because in NF, for those of you who don't know, these tumors, they grow on the nerves. They're very rarely removed by surgery because then you remove that area of the body to function. So these people typically die with enormous amounts of tumors. They have been calling us and saying, we want to push the research agenda. We want you to organize a body donation program. They have set up a mentoring program to mentor each other psychologically. They have created a kids camp so that our kids can help each other. So I think if we have an involved patient community, this is not, and what you said this morning, Nicola, about ticking the box. I think, yes, some people still think it's a ticking the box. If you succeed in getting the patients involved, you have a motor that you can't stop. And it's not only for the patients it's really good, it's also for the researchers. And I was talking to one of the researchers, and they said, I just joined the NF field, but it's like crack cocaine. You're never going to get me out of here anymore. Because they were so touched by the patients that are part of this. So I think the power of the patient is sometimes underestimated in a lot of disease communities, as we have to do patient engagement because that's on the list, right? So just wanted to make that point. But we should PR it.
Yeah. Olivier, I see you wanted to respond, and I'm going to come to Lee in a second to ask him about how we manage expectations, because patients get involved and they want to see something happen and something really change in their lives, and research is a long process. Olivier.
Yes, just before I wanted to add something to Matthias' exposed. We claim until now that it's patients inside the project are very important. That's true. It was written, and we know that it is. However, now we have to provide some evidence that it is. And I think we are another step. And this step is perhaps the innovative way, how it works. And to answer to the question, what is the key point? At GDRF, in fact, as I said, we integrated the IMI because it was really an opportunity with such tool to really have to be inside with patient at the decision very upstream of the project. And with the strategy and governing group, it was very interesting to approach the problem of the patient. And like Matthias, we have just submitted also, we are partner with a new project which will be in parallel to Inodia, which is on hypoglycemia. And typically hypoglycemia is a problem of the patient day to day. Of course, we are not alone. It was with companies. But I mean that do this kind of subject be on the table if there was not patient? I don't know, perhaps. But I think that patients, and not only ourselves, GDRF, but also others, with Emsley, for example, we insist of the importance of such approach. And company follows also. And they said, yes, indeed, we can do it. So that I wanted to say that we are implemented such, I would say, innovative approach, which is a reality.
Okay, thank you. Matthias, did you want to comment on that before I come to Lee? Yes.
Just on that as well, I think we touched it earlier this morning, the return on engagement, the impact. And I think this is something we really have to look at in the next years. DIA last year started an initiative from the company perspective on what is the impact for the companies of engaging patients, and collected a couple of measures, so key impact indicators or whatever we will call them. I think we need that for all the stakeholders, from the patients, exactly what Olivier described, because it may be a different, or at least a different timing of feeling needs and necessities, and then across the whole community. We plan to address that also in this new project, but I think it has to be a broad approach of all of us, and whoever can contribute to that would be really welcome to the table.
So have I understood correctly that you have in your company already started to identify some indicators on return on engagement?
A joint approach of the DIA in the US, but also then in Europe, and they made surveys across the companies where the companies are with patient involvement, which was also a diverse picture, but also then to collect their views on how to measure the impact. And so we have a starting point. I think this has to be much better developed, but it's clear we need it, and we jointly, I think, will find a good way of using the cases where it worked anyway, the ones that Olivier described, others where it is obvious that this is something that has an impact, and then to just bring it into a more general description. Okay.
Lee, let me turn to you, because and maybe I'm reading into the title of your network, the Genomics Consortium, which for me implies that there will be perhaps some rare diseases or other conditions where there is very little out there. So if you engage patients and their families in research, I imagine you also have to do some expectation management, because they hope that this is going to accelerate something, and it may not, and it may lead nowhere. So how do we get the balance right between encouraging and bringing them on board, and then setting some realistic expectations of what the process might involve?
Thank you. So I like to come back to why we are here, and the theme this year is open innovation, and I would like to get the word open again, right? Get the word open again is, how many of you here do work in a research lab? Please, show of hands. Okay, that's a good number. How many of you have actually hosted a patient in your labs? 1, 2, 3. Yeah? So when we say open, we really want to bring the patients, which many of them are funding many of our research projects, into the lab. When we say, oh, we found these difficulties in generating the result, we don't want them to just take that for granted. We want them to see how it's done and understand what are the challenges. I think your party did a great job at actually bringing some of that awareness to the patient, but it's important, if we can open our doors, have them in the lab say, look, we are doing the best we can. We're pipetting as much as we can with multi-channel pipette, etc. But there are some limitations. There are some questions we have to ask. In that sense, I think opening the lab is a good step, but also we have a project that Al, my colleague, spoke about yesterday, which our colleague Rachel in Toronto, she's just writing a blog entry every week in lay terms of what the project she's doing, why it worked, why it didn't work most of the time, and uploaded all the results into the open database, the Zenodo database. Anybody can download the data. And if the patients are interested, they can read on the web different ways that this science is done, and they can interpret the data themselves. They come back to Rachel and say, I disagree. It is open there, really open. So I think that's the best way of actually managing the expectations, bringing the patients together in the process, yes. I would like to, you mentioned really well the rare disease. We do work with several rare diseases. One of them is actually, I think, is a great story because it is a rare condition called the FOP, fibrosis dysplasia ossificans progressiva. It's Stone Man syndrome. Basically, what happens is that due to one mutation in one kinase, one of the non-studied kinase from yesterday's talk, muscle turns to bone slowly. So they get locked in positions, right? It's a really rare condition. And of course, as happened with many diseases, sequence is cheap nowadays. We can sequence, they found the gene. What could they do after they found the gene? It's almost exasperating to know that perhaps the solution is here, but what do you do with that? So they came to us and said, can you work on what this gene does? Do we understand? Do we understand what the mutation does? And we said, yes, of course. So they funded one postdoc and one PhD student from something that is so rare, 1 in 2 million, no market. We went from generating the 3D structure, so what the lock looks like. We found out that the mutation actually creates an activating protein. We designed the assay. We found new compounds. We're sharing all this. And in 6 years now, since the program started, we are designing a clinical trial, right? That's compressing everything in 6 years. Something that in the past would have been impossible to address. But the beauty of the story is that because everything is open, another group working a complete different disease is another rare cancer. It's diffuse intrinsic pontine glioma. Again, Al touched on that yesterday. They found that the same mutation that happens to generate this Stone Man syndrome also is involved in 30% of a patient with the IPG. What happens is that the research in the ICR emailed us and they say, sure, here's all the toolkit, take it. So in one go, we just reduced the time in 4.5 years. No questions asked.
That's a fantastic example of why innovation needs to be open, and thank you for doing that. Maybe we can pick up with the panel. Julian from the Dravet syndrome talked about the fact that they identified a potential test they wanted to use, and the university said, no, that's our mouse model. Given the importance of open innovation, and Lee, you've just explained how dramatically that can shorten the time lag in doing things, is there any justifiable nature anymore for things sitting in silos?
You know my opinion.
Yeah. Anyone else from the panel want to comment on that? Because you're right, innovation has to also be linked to openness. Go ahead, Annette.
It makes me shiver. And it shocks me every time I hear it. And unfortunately, we hear it more often than we wish. I think what we need to do, and now I'm going to be the activist for a second, I think we need our patient community out there to voice that. That university XYZ, researcher XYZ, did not want to share their animal model or cell model. Because let's be reminded that these models are made with taxpayer dollars. And that then when the taxpayer dollar generator is sick, he doesn't get access to the animal model. I mean, I just can't stand it. But I think and I don't want to get emotional here, but I really can't. I think what we really need to create, I always go back to the HIV movement, right? Where people chained themselves up to the gates of the different people that were working on AIDS to make things move. I'm very well understanding, and I think as a foundation we really generate and listen to the problems that researchers have of, because I'm worried about Rachel's career, If you can't publish, what is your career, right? We don't want these people to work in the supermarket because these are the ones that we should promote and should incentivize to keep working. But on the other hand, I think we should do something about this lockup. If you would ask me, I think we need a law. We need the IMI to step up here and to say this is illegal that researchers sit on their animal models. But they bring capacity, right? They bring knowledge, they bring expertise, exactly. So we keep them in, but they should stop locking up their mice.
Well, in that case, let me now put up the poll, the Slido poll that we've developed for this session, because we're going to be asking you to vote precisely on a little bit of this issue, which is what needs to change. most needs training in patient engagement? We talked a lot about patient literacy and training patients, but they're just one of the players in the system. We've heard this morning and this afternoon about the other players and stakeholders are incentivized in different ways. Researchers are incentivized by prestige and publications, etc. Industry is incentivized by their payments. Regulators are incentivized by what it costs. So it isn't just about training patients. Who most needs training in patient engagement for it to happen? Now, very clearly we've got some enthusiastic voting going on, and researchers are coming out very strongly on the top. Perhaps that's unsurprising given that we are talking about it, but I see healthcare professionals as well also need some training to be able to enable healthcare patient engagements. And industry is coming up. Patients are at the sort of bottom end of this, possibly because they've had some training and patient organisations are doing it, but the other players in the system also need to be picking it up. Panel, you're watching this in real time, and I see both James and Matthias want to come in. Matthias.
I agree that there is a huge need on the researcher side, and especially also within the companies, to be trained on how to work with patients and to do that all the time. I would question the very low figure for patients because we have started UParty because there was this urgent need of having more patient experts who can then be partner in specific aspects of the research and development chain. And we have the good examples. We had a few before, and it was always the same names being on the IMA committees, being at very few company interactions. We now have 100 more fellows from UParty, which is great. And the feedback showed they are immediately involved in these decision processes. But if we look at the spectrum of diseases and countries, it is far too small, this number still. So we need much, much more of those, and that's why training, capacity building on the patient side is equally needed. I don't question the other part and the outcome of the poll, but I would see this equally
You're doing
important.
a good job because the percentage of patients is going up. James.
I actually think that as a research funder, there's a real role for us to play here, and that's one of the things which we've tried to do in the UK. We've created an Autism Research Network, and it's effectively trying to bring researchers closer to the community and the community closer to researchers. And so one of the things that we are doing when people sign up to the research network is, first of all, they have to sign up to a set of principles about open research. So they have to share their data, but also they have to be committed to engaging with the community as well. And one of the really interesting things which has came out of this for me within the context of autism research, and I'm sure it's similar in other areas, is actually when you engage with researchers, they do want to engage with the community. They're just not really sure how to do it. So it's kind of slightly tragic in so much as they just somewhat slightly lack the skills to sort of go about and undertake that specific task. And so what we're beginning to do now is develop a suite of training for researchers to support them how to undertake research. Equally, we recognise that some of the disconnect between researchers and the community, particularly autistic people, is really about some people not really understanding research and why certain research methods are used. So we are in parallel trying to upskill autistic people and caregivers in research methods so that they can participate in an equal footing with researchers in terms of research discussions, but also to let them become advocates for autism research. And so we're just a way to launch a small grant scheme which allows autistic people to take their first step into research and become researchers themselves. And I think that empowers the community and shows to them that this is for them. This is not so far away, and it just bridges the gap.
Okay. I mean, perhaps we should remember that Dominique, just before lunch, she was saying there was someone from the audience who was explaining that they, as a pharmacist and also as a patient, the researcher he's working with are both very close to the end of their emotional tether. And she said, well, communicate. Are you talking to each other about the fact that you've got a problem? And you've said that researchers have a willingness, but don't know where to start and how to do it. So maybe this is where you, Patty, and others can help. Olivier.
Yes, I am totally in agreement with what has been said. Indeed, it's a matter of communication, and I would say it's on both sides. Researcher to come to patient, but also patient to come to researcher. But how? That's, I would say, perhaps easier for researcher to come to patient than patient to go to researcher. There is a sort of filter to put, or not a filter, I would say more an additive discussion, lay language, as we say, for discussion. And foundation, association, which are a part now, are really stakeholders. As part of the industry, I think that we could put also what are the stakeholders like association, foundation of research. I think it's also important because they have a role there.
Okay. Annette, do you want to comment on?
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised to see this graph. Honestly, I'm a huge fan of you, Patty, and I would like to congratulate the people that have developed this, because I think it's like if somebody would come to you and say, tomorrow you're a brain surgeon, but you get no training. So the thing is that then you're suddenly thrown into a pool where who is catching you? The one who is potentially misinforming you, right? So I think the fact that you have set up that you, Patty, and we're copying as much as we can, and we would like to get even more involved with you, because I think it is informing patients and to make sure that they're educated so that they can understand what is actually happening, what their role is, and that they understand this research acronym, right? We're very good in 3-letter words. And when I sent you the document, I have to say that I was even guilty myself in 3-letter words. But I think we should demystify science for our patients, so basically that they understand what the researchers are talking about. And do I have 1 minute to tell a very nice little anecdote that happened 2 weeks ago? So 2 weeks ago, we have a very big collaborative initiative, which is called Synodos, which is really getting multidisciplinary teams to work together, share their data openly in a hub, and where the patients are actually the participants. So the patient drives the research agenda. The patients opened every presentation. It was a very emotional 2 days. One of the things that happened is one of the moms was standing next to me and she said, can I talk about that MEK inhibitor that is really working well for NF? And I said, sure. I said, do you know that the researcher who actually discovered this MEK inhibitor being working now for your son in his registration trial is actually sitting in this room? And she said, what do you mean? So I walked up to the researcher and I presented the mom to the researcher. I can tell you there were tears from both sides. Because this is what it means to bring researchers and patients to each other. But we have to educate our patients so they can properly participate and they understand what the researchers are talking about. I think is really important.
I just want to maybe sort of draw some direction here to the messages we heard yesterday from the European Commission. We had someone senior from DG Research saying in the next framework programme that health will be a key element, but somehow streamlined. But he also mentioned the fact there's going to be a focus on citizen science. And I'm wondering how we can position patient engagement in that broader focus on citizen science, because there's going to be specific funding lines and many research consortium will be required to show that they are contributing to that. And panel members and actually all the audience, how do we position patient engagement as part of this citizen science? Do we need a set of principles? What do we do to make sure it doesn't become a tick box, which is very common when it's a criteria for funding? Any suggestions? Yes, I see hands up from the audience. Yes, we'll give you a microphone and we'll get some input.
Thank you. Very good discussions from our panel members here. I want to answer that question by...
Who are you, sir?
Oh, okay. My name is Magnus Conte, and I work for World Vision Ireland. I'm the director for Global Health Programs and Innovation. And I lead World Vision's involvement in the Ebola grant, which is one of the IMI grants supporting the Ebola vaccine trial in Sierra Leone. Now, I work for an NGO, so I'm not a clinical researcher. But of course, we have been invited by Janssen to be part of the vaccine trial to support community engagement and mobilization for participation in the clinical trial. And because it's a 2-dose vaccine also, compliance with the first and second dose is very important. So the point I want to make is that this is a typical example of how civil society organizations and NGOs who have been embedded in these communities for many years. World Vision has been in Sierra Leone for over 20 years. We have a deep understanding and association with the communities. It's a trusted organization, not just within the community, but also with local government and with national government. Those relationships need to be leveraged in terms of patient engagement, in terms of community engagement, because patients are within the communities. If the communities that have so much influence in behavior change do not get engaged properly or are not engaged properly in buying in to the research, it will affect the cooperation of the patients that you're going to deal with. In the case of a vaccine trial like the Ebola vaccine, there are lots of controversies already around Ebola itself and sensitivities. Now you can imagine trying to conduct an Ebola vaccine trial and how difficult it is, not just to get volunteers, but to get the community buy-in. But we've done an excellent work of that in Sierra Leone, where the Ebola vaccine trial is taking place, by developing a specific communication strategy to optimize community engagement and mobilization for support of the trial. So I just want to throw that in as another angle that should be considered. We don't necessarily need to train researchers to do everything. Why don't we leverage existing expertise in the community? There are local social scientists that understand the communities, that understand the cultures, and understand the rumor management that needs to enhance engagement. I just wanted to throw that in as a suggestion. So engage local civil society organizations.
Thank you so much, because can we pull up the questions that were from the earlier session that we didn't get a chance to look at, because you've spoken to one of those questions, but we were challenged by the audience, what happens in areas of, say, infectious disease where there aren't patient organizations, and how do we have patient engagement in areas of acute sickness rather than a chronic or a long-term condition? And I think you've just spoken to that very nicely, which is you draw on other community actors and NGOs and others who can act as a body to help bring people in. I think thank you for that intervention. We had someone else who wanted to speak. Yes, we'll get you a microphone.
Hi, actually I was going to make a couple of comments. So just on the voting on who needs the most training, some people from the James Lind Alliance did a thing about agenda setting, comparing agendas as we would think they are by patients and different people doing research. Just interestingly, although everybody came out quite badly, the academic agenda was much closer to patients than the pharmaceutical industry. And the big issue there was that the pharmaceutical industry tends to focus on drugs, and what lots of patients and members of the public want, and mental health is a good one, is other treatments other than drugs. And there was a massive disparity there, and it was bigger for industry than it was. So just a comment about the voting, and then there's a little bit of evidence there about what's the reality. So I think that's worth bearing in mind. The other thing I think is worth talking about is the UPATI model, which I think is great. But I think the problem with that is if we want a population that's engaged, actually it's only ever going to be a relatively small minority of people who can undertake training to that level. And actually what we want to do is to get, in quotes, ordinary people involved. People who can, so you need things that you can do in half a day or a day. And it also, I think it's not about people learning about research as making them healthily sceptical about research. Because lots of people are listening to stuff on the news where people tell them this will double your risk of this or improve your life expectancy. We want a public that can look at the research, whether it's produced by the pharmaceutical industry or academia, in a critical, not a skeptical, but a critical way, so that they can think about it. And I've just, the last point, I mean, the citizen science stuff is about getting members of the public to collect data for you. That's fab, but what we were talking about before was people being involved in designing the research. I think the two can be complementary, because if you get people collecting data for you in one way or another, they might start asking questions about how was the design of the research done, so it feeds into the involvement bit. And if people get involved in research, then they'll want to be interested in what happens to the results of the work that they've been involved in. So I think we have to think of this as a reciprocal cycle. And we do want to engage with the ordinary people. And I was just thinking about the stuff about the dental stuff. How do we get those people on deprived communities and so on involved in something that doesn't mean when you've got people with very busy lives, not much money, not much spare time, and probably by definition got a health condition or caring for somebody with a serious health condition. How do we make this something that they can get involved in without it being a massive burden on them?
Okay, thank you. I know we have an intervention from Dominique who challenged us earlier today. Could I just give the mic to Dominique first? Thank you. And then, panel, I'm going to invite you to respond on these issues. Yes.
Completely agree that we need to involve more patients than just the 100 U-Party people or the couple of thousand patient advocates that are out there. And what I always say is allow us as patients a budget to go out there and talk to our fellow patients. We know where to find them. We know these are people like we had in the dental example this morning. You reach them when you go to where we can find you. And it's not like everybody has to be at that table. We can be intermediaries. We already are intermediaries for a lot of other people, but we have to be facilitated to do it. And that's what people forget. If we want to do our job as patient representatives, as patient advocates, in a good way, we need to be facilitated to do that, to be able to go out into our own community and talk on their level about what we're planning to do and how they look at it. That's a step that almost everybody forgets.
Thank you for that intervention. Yes, I've got a couple more hands up. The gentleman at the back, because we haven't heard from you, and then we'll come to you again.
Chris Mulder, Soft Systems. I'm not a researcher. I am from data science company. I was just wondering, and I am patient, of course. I'm just wondering if that's so important to include as many patients as possible. Why don't we use leverage on technology? But not technology as, delivering printouts with, like in each hospital. Yeah, if you wash your teeth, if you brush your teeth, your smile will be nice. No, it's fine. But including new technologies like games, interactive games, using, for example, artificial intelligence that will be chatting to people, learning from them and teaching them how to use, informing about healthcare. Just by use cases, modeled use cases, to explain how it works. It's, I believe, the easiest way how people can gain new knowledge, new perception. Okay, it's maybe not revolutionary, but it still can be about order of magnitude more patients involved and feedback collected than by traditional means and with less budget, actually.
Okay.
What do you think about it?
Thank you.
Thank
so
you.
This is about how technology could facilitate that process of health literacy and health communication.
Yes, and also include more patients, because it will be direct input from patient and not during time of like half a day, take from job or come to hospital. No, from home. If you get time morning, then morning. If you get time afternoon. It doesn't restrict your time or place. You can do whenever you like. Just talking to chatbot or,
We have an input here. We also have a lady there. So if you wanted to speak.
Thank you. Speaking purely from a patient's perspective now, I would like to second what the gentleman in front of me just said. Actually involving the patients in the design of a study may be a crucial point in ascertaining that he has some level of control about it, because he feels he understands it. But I'd like to add another factor to the discussion that was actually brought up just at the end of the previous panel discussion. Basically, there was the motion not to consider the data given as economic value. Why I can appreciate that from an ethical point of view, I think actually doing so would lead to a fallacy, because some entities will definitely consider the data a monetary value. speaking of insurance companies, for example. And seeing that the health system is being driven towards an economical approach of running things, approaching things, I think it's going to be only a question of time until even clinics will consider the data an economic commodity. By consequence, ignoring this factor will lead to bad things happening both in the security and the trust sector. Because speaking as a patient, even if I know how the study is being set up, having a feeling that I understand what's going on with my data, not being informed about the economic aspects of what's going to happen with my data, and not seeing that people actually care about that too, will increase my trust again.
Thank you. We'll have one last input from the floor, lady just here in front of the pillar, and then panel, you've got lots of things to talk about. Yes.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Malvika Vias, and I'm working for the European Society for Medical Oncology. I feel this is a really important discussion, and I think the points that have been raised have been quite valid. We represent the prescribers, so the medical oncologists, and a lot of discussion has taken place on who should be educated, from which side should be educated. And I agree, of course, the healthcare professionals should be educated too, but also to have a pool of patient advocates who understands the field is also very important for us. So as ESMO, we actually do conduct workshops with patient advocates to teach them, bring the patient advocates and oncologists as well as people who are experts in the respective fields, to talk about issues that are of relevance to them. For example, 2 weeks ago, or actually last week, we had a workshop with patient advocates focusing on the science for advocates. So we brought together experts, we taught them how to read scientific literature, we taught them how to use certain tools, because we as the oncologists, representing the oncologists, we feel that if we are engaging with patient advocates who are actually educated about the field, it's also very helpful for us. So we're actively working with them to ensure, to fill the gaps of education, because oncology, as you know, is the field that's going to be most affected in the coming years. So we feel that we will continue our education exercises and continue to educate the advocates to create a community and add new advocates too and bring the new ones in. And last week we had 50 advocates who came, around 40 to 50 advocates, specialized in the cancer field, who came to this. It was a 2-day interactive workshop, and it really, really worked. So I think the scientific societies also have a responsibility in this field.
Thank you. So panel members, I'll come back to the audience in a little bit. Panel members, what a lot of things we've got to talk about. Health literacy, health skepticism, we need to build that amongst the population. Leverage the relationships, the trusted relationships with NGOs, community organizations, etc. We've been asked to think about, let's not sweep under the carpet the fact that there is a monetary value somewhere on how the data is used, and we need to acknowledge that and bring that on board. The role of the need, we still need to have well-trained patient advocates, but not everyone can have the time investment for the gold standard of EUPATI. So can we use gamification and small segments of training for others? Panel, which ones would you like to? Okay, should we start with James, and then I'll come to Matthias.
I wanted to pick up on the representativeness point that was made. I think that one of the easy things to do if you're in this situation, for example, if you're a research charity, is to say that, is to get into the cycle of saying it's a real problem how not representative our involvement is, and then just cyclically say that again and again and again, but not actually take proactive action. So one of the things which we've tried to do is develop an involvement strategy where we're making concrete plans for ensuring that everything we do is as representative as possible. So if that means having benchmarks in terms of how we do our community consultation. So when we did our James Lind Alliance priority setting partnership, we made sure that the survey was as representative as possible in terms of looking at things like postcodes and using that as a socioeconomic indicator, and then using looking at how racially and ethnically diverse our population was with respect to what we know about the UK averages. And then also looking at the research we fund. So we fund research cohorts. How representative are those? Now, those are actually very, very representative because the way we recruit ensures that we capture everyone by going through where everyone goes. But I still think there are challenges, and one of the things which I notice is the more involved the involvement becomes, the less good we become at making sure that our involvement is representative. And so I think that's why we still need a proactive strategy. And I think that a lot of this comes down to money. So we have to invest in involvement. So you have to pay people for their time. Autism is a long-term condition where people, on average, are worse off. They're poorer. They're less likely to be in employment. And so we just, as a principle, compensate everyone for everything that they do. So regardless of what they do, we offer them compensation for their time, and that is just the principle. And it's simply because if you don't do that, then you start getting into a situation where you begin to have a self-selecting population. And that is difficult as a charity because we would like as much as possible to rely on volunteers, but you have to, in the end, have a set of principles if you're going to be serious about making sure that your involvement is representative.
Excellent. Matthias, you wanted, and then I'll come to Olivier.
Just exactly on what you said, James. I think this is something we have to develop as quickly as possible all around the disease areas and activities, clear rules on reimbursement of the effort, because that was always a bit questionable. We have never had questioned why a KOL, any scientist, top scientist invited for a lecture shouldn't get his travel and a honorarium. For patients, there was the expectation they will bring that voluntarily. This is impossible. We can't expect that. I'm fully with you. And we need clear rules on how to reimburse the effort in a meaningful, in a fair way. So also not to be in a situation where this might look as bribery, unfair interaction. And just a quick comment on the training. I think this was exactly, we need much more. We need small trainings. That's why we have the toolbox of your party to also support the development of quick self-learning activities, of half-a-day trainings, 2-day weekend trainings, whatever, to address specific aspects. And we need we need thousands of people who have a better understanding of how to interact with the other partners in this whole story. I think this aspect of funding, how to empower the patients so that they have the time, that they have the money also from their organization maybe to participate in the respective events, is a really important one, and it has to be done, but it can't come from companies because that would be really difficult. So this has to be funding maybe from the governments in that country or wherever, and I think here we have to jointly think about best approaches. Also because we have not, I think, completely solved the conflict of interest issues of involving patients, because we had we had bad examples we came across in your party where companies reported and patients jointly reported that the patients had been very successfully, very positively seen from both sides involved in development activities of a new drug with that company, the dialogue with the regulators, and afterwards that patient was not invited anymore for the regulatory advice from that regulatory authority because it was somewhat marked for at least a couple of years because that might have been already a contamination issue. Having so closely worked with a company, then you're out. A very big patient organization who has many professionals, patient advocates, may be able to afford such a situation because then you send somebody else. A small patient organization, rare diseases, it's impossible. If you have one person who is driving it, it would create a schizophrenic situation. Cloning is not that easily possible yet, so we need to have better rules, better ways of how to deal in these complicated areas. And where we talk really about vulnerable populations, how to make a meaningful interaction with all stakeholders.
Okay.
Because it's necessary that the dialogue goes in all directions, and we have to find intelligent ways of dealing with that.
Thank you. Olivier.
Yes, about how to more involve patients. I will not come back on what have been said about training and what's said about apathy. I think I agree totally, and I don't want to come back to that. I just want to add one thing, which is perhaps the strategy of success. What is best that an example, which is a success, to push others to do the same thing. And I think that there is now possibility to do that. To choose really the patient, the right one inside a project, and really to coach them. So it's not easy, but it's manageable. And after you can use that as an example. So I just want to add that we must have some action, and through results we can sell that to others.
Okay, thank you. Did Lee or Annette, did you want to?
So I would just like to come back to your citizen scientist question in the beginning. I think the way we can do more citizen science is actually empowering everybody with first data, transparency data, and then tools. Because normally, if you look at all the good innovations, they are one of those, wow, so obvious, but I never seen it. You don't need to be highly trained in any specific scientific field to actually contribute to evolution, right? So in that sense, I mean, I bring those, I always like the example of those, your smartphones. All these apps, do you think the people from Apple wrote it? No. This was a crowdsourced effort. What did they provide to the community was the toolkit to write the software and a few sensors that are already established in the platform. Just like what farmers are doing with the SVC, sharing all these tools. It's a platform to really allow open exploration. The moment you say, you frame the question very specifically, you're killing a lot of that. So both sharing and actually letting the community explore, I think it's much more powerful way to come up with new innovation for patients and for the general population as well. On engaging patients in different ways, I mean, even the general population, to our colleague there who suggested virtual reality, I think we should be trying other ways of communicating this. We've been working with an entire arts university in the UK. So they come, they learn what we're trying to do, they learn about the patient experience, and again, we don't say you have to produce a video. They go off and they come up with very interesting, very insightful ways to communicate the challenge of reproducibility in science, for instance, or the challenge in ethics. So we should be tapping into all these different communication channels.
Okay, Annette.
Yeah, I think we should make science more fun. And I think that whole idea that the gentleman in the back brought up of gaming, I think we should really make sure that people understand that science is not that dull, dry, in the basement, researcher drinking coffee the whole day and trying to fix this amazing problem. I think we should really put that gaming out. And I think but we should throw out challenges. We should say, because one of the things that I heard some time ago from somebody from the Broad who said, we have all this beautiful data nobody's using, nobody's looking at the data. And I think we should incentivize the citizens to look at the data. And just to give you probably know the X-Prize example, when BP had this huge oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico a couple of years ago, X-Prize threw out the prize. Who can fix this? Who can reduce the oil spill by half in, I don't know which time frame? The second prize was a tattoo shop owner from Los Angeles. And because he used the same technology to remove tattoos from people's bodies. So just to give you an idea and just to endorse that citizenship, but we should really challenge the community that, yes, science is hard. Science is hard for everybody, but please join us and game with us. And then the quick thing I wanted to bring into the reimbursement that was brought up earlier. I think what is really important here is that maybe you, Patty, you guys can give us some indication of how should this reimbursement look? Because if not, we may risk of ending up in, the wealthy and the stingy foundations, the one that pay a lot and the one that pay nothing. Because I completely agree with Dominique. There are people that are these UPATI trained people, but they act as ambassadors for the rest of the community. But it's true that we should have some reimbursement, but it would help if it could be somehow a little bit regulated.
Okay, we just to give you all a sense of where we are, we've got 15 minutes left in this agenda, and I know there's a few people from the audience who want to come in, so let's have that. You were first, and then this gentleman in the red jacket. So this lady here.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Mariana Vicente. I work at the European AIDS Treatment, AITG. It was already mentioned here quite a few times.
You got a lot of applause for your organisation. Your organisation was applauded, was recognised for the work that it's done.
So as you saw, we are deeply involved in patient engagement activities for many years now, so we are proud to say we're innovative on that with ECAP, our European Community Advisory Board. We keep working and improving this process, and we're involved in new party as well, which we are very proud of as well. I would like just to add a layer of complexity. Maybe I'm sorry for that. But so because we are talking about the patient engagement process, how to have better patient engagement, how to use the data we have out there. But I'd like maybe to address this to the panel and to take a step back about the data that is still missing. And I'd like to link this with what was already briefly mentioned about key vulnerable groups that are not so much included in this process. And from the HIV field and related co-infections like hepatitis and TB, of course, for us this is of big importance because, for example, key populations like drug users, like sex workers, like women, there's still a very, very, very lack of data on that. So I would like just to bring this up, that let's not forget those that are not being given the chance to be involved in patient engagement.
Thank you. There's a gentleman here in the red jacket, and then we'll be coming here.
So I'm going to speak again over advance. The way we try to engage patients in advance, we wrote a code of conduct, and I really recommend you to go and have a look to the advance code of conduct. What we did, we put the code of conduct on a website, on internet, and we got, like, if I do remember, something like 400 different remarks, comments, correction, suggestion. And so we took care about all these suggestions. Then we organized with the EMA on some sort of a neutral area. We organized a meeting where all the patients could come, with the industry was there, with regulatory was there, and everybody was there. And so we had a very open discussion regarding the code of conduct. And then at the end of that, we made a second draft that was finally published. And we keep that one as a very open document. So it will certainly improve over time, but it will be improved through patient consultation.
Thank you. Lady here.
Ingrid Klingmann, EFGCP. When we engage patients, knowledgeable patients as we call them in your party, so patients who really know about the area, know about the research, there are, amongst many other things, 2 points which I would like to throw into the head here. Number one is that we need to make sure that the patients who participate, first, no, I start with the other one. When you want something, you get it more easily if you are very clear in what you want. And having many different patients involved, coming all with somewhat different ideas, somewhat differently phrased ideas, it's very difficult for the other partners to really give so much weight to that, because it could still be interpreted differently. And this leads to the second point that I want to bring up to the table, and this is the representativeness of the wishes or the proposals from a patient that is at the table. And I think here is also quite a bit of work to be done by the patient communities, by the patient organizations. It's partly already done in the bigger ones, but definitely not in the smaller ones, that they amongst themselves come to very clear agreements what they want exactly, precisely, and then find a way to communicate that and lobby for that in the different contexts that they can envisage and that they can make. But I think the clearer the message and the more representative the message appears, the better is the chance that it gets the weight in the decision-making process.
Excellent, thank you. I have one more hand up there, and then I'll bring it back to the panel.
Sue Pavitt. So I just wanted to talk about the reimbursement side of things. In the UK, we are very lucky because the government funding bodies have all taken on board very seriously patient public involvement engagement. So it's embedded in all our grant funding schemes, so that once the research is funded, the patients do get reimbursed. It's at a generous rate. It's £150 a day. And that is supposed to be recognising that their input is just as valuable as my workday. It's their workday they're giving up to come to the table. The pre-funding work, I think sometimes you have to be innovative yourself. So when I was out doing the work with the schools, this is a very deprived community where they've not gone to university before. Their aspiration now is to go to university, and I forgot to tell you this morning that 2 of those 10 girls have applied to do dentistry. So, fantastic. But what do we do for them? They're part of our Smile Aid, a Patient Public Involvement Forum. Their expenses are paid to come into the university. But most important to them is they get a certificate to say that they are Raised in Yorkshire, which is a research activity in schools about dental research and health. They're a Raised in Yorkshire Student Research Fellow. It gives them great kudos. That's what they wanted to be called. They get a certificate. They can put it on their statements for applying to university, and it raises their opportunities because they don't have parents that can give them the exposure of going and doing work placements at university normally. And we also make sure that they have access to those outreach departments. So sometimes you can actually give them something much more precious than money because you're giving them a leg up on the ladder that they would never normally have. But so I think there's many ways to do it, but the most important thing is whoever is at the table, we make them feel absolutely partnership, valued and essential.
Thank you for that. So panel, maybe your final thoughts on that. We've had some really good interventions from the audience about acknowledging the value and the time that the patients give up, making sure that the space is safe for them to come in, especially if they come from disadvantaged groups, and putting in some effort. I mean, James, you told us about the extent to which your organisation is focused on making sure that you get people from different areas, etc., which is a great example. We've also had various inputs from the audience that we need to think about on the role of different players and making this happen. We now need to conclude our session looking at innovative models of collaboration. So what lessons would you take from all the comments that we've had? If we had to describe a sort of paragraph description of what an innovative model of collaboration would look like, what would you be voting to put in that paragraph? James, kick us off.
For me, it's hard to summarise succinctly, but I think it's part of a process and making sure that everyone feels that they're part of the same journey. So it's about having a shared vision and a shared plan and a shared agreed set of outcomes which you're all trying to achieve, and accepting that you're trying to come to some sort of consensus. And if you do that, I think you gain trust, and with trust and a shared vision, you have a sense of hope within your community and researchers about going in the same direction. And then it's really important from there that you have robust structures for involving people, because through those structures, that is where you can begin to do innovative things in terms of involvement. So you have to have your cohorts and groups of people who have skills in that area. You have to have structures that allow researchers to be able to do that early stage work in terms of involvement. And then I think one thing which we haven't discussed yet, but which I think is important, is you need to share progress. You need to explain to people why research is making progress. And I know that people have talked a lot about how research can be frustrating, but if we have a negative result, we still found out something we didn't know. We're always gaining knowledge. And I think that that's one of the biggest things which we're trying to do at Autistica now, is go, we know this because of research. We know this little thing about anxiety because of research. And now we're one step closer to a treatment for anxiety and autism. And if you explain how things are making a difference, even if it's in small and incremental steps, then I think you're developing a community who feels like they're making progress together rather than trying to force them together.
Okay. Mathieu?
Yes, to summarize it's difficult, I agree. I would say that involvement of patient and success in involvement is like a science. We said before that we have just to put patient inside, but it's not true. We have always said we have to educate them. We have also to make them more easily communicate with researcher. We have to explain what is the kind of project. There is completely different kind of projects. There is some who speak to them directly. There is some which are just platforms, but we need them. It's a step in the research, and we have to explain. We have also to educate pharma industry, and now they are, I would say. So all that is a sort of, to put all that together is not easy, and the innovation, I would say, is put in place what we have said, because we have said a lot of things, but now we have to practice. And it's what we can say strategy of success. Have some success, and after you can sell it. Okay. Matthias.
Yeah, I very much hope that constantly over the next months, years, we will see a steep increase in this normal interaction, that it is just a normality, that patients are involved in every activity by every stakeholder, not only by pharma, but certainly we have taken the message and will work on it. I also very much hope that we will continue in the same way, and I'm a bit biased because I'm in IMI so long, but that we will continue to use the IMI test environment for testing novel approaches. We could go for artificial intelligence gaming applications there. We go for the big data approaches, as we heard before lunch, and I think it is clear for every company that this may not be beneficial, the outcome for every individual company, and some of the learnings might result in a much better treatment without an increase or even a decrease of income. That's fine. I think that's necessary, and I think everybody is prepared for that. And we have also worked on how to create pediatric platforms so that we can find a better way of involving the vulnerable groups in the necessary research and development. And just one thought or wish, and we have to discuss it with the IMI colleagues, is maybe we can expand the area where we have looked at co-development, real public-private partnership development activities, which we have done only in the antibiotics and vaccines field so far, antimicrobial resistance and Ebola. Why not thinking jointly about a co-development, clinical development in orphan disease, in rare disease areas as well, if we find a good joint approach for that?
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to pass the microphone to Lee now because I could see him very happily and enthusiastic on that.
Look, I don't think you guys would expect a pharma guy to say this, right? So I fully applaud Matthias and their team and everybody at Bayer. And actually, that's something we've been seeing. And we talk a lot about trust. That's something that comes always in the discussions. But trust can only be earned. And earned through transparency. The moment we are not open, not clear, that we are working all the same, if you try to hide even a small part of that information, you lose it completely. Hard to get, easy to lose. So, and one thing that I would like to bring finally to our discussion is the matter of time and speed. We talk about patients here. We have, IMIs and farmers are very well funded. Many of our colleagues are here, very wealthily funded by the research programs. But one thing that none of us have, and especially for the patient, is time. Right? And that's something that no money can buy. Only thing that can be efficient is structuring. We all look at the problem and try to figure out the best way we can work together. And I'd like to leave the audience with that thinking. Think about it. Patients should not be just sitting on the side. Time is of essence. The more people can get here to try to find a solution, the better. Computing. In the past, people programmed in serial computing. One task solved, pass another, to another, to another. Is that efficient? No. There comes the parallel computing. We should be adopting this parallel drug development altogether. As Matthias said, pharma, super good in a lot of this stuff. Academics, basic science. Patient, very probably in many rare diseases, I guarantee the patient, they live with the condition 24/7, they know the disease better than any clinician, any scientist, any farmer.
Thank you. Annette.
Yeah, and just adding up to that, what you just said, it's very interesting to see some of the traditional thinkers still thinking that patient data entered by patient is suboptimal. And we have specifically, so we had the NF registry, which was data that was entered by patients. The clinicians were worried about the quality of that data. We just published a paper where we showed that, in fact, the incidence and the percentages of everything that the patients reported was identical to what the clinicians reported. There was a little bias to the more severe manifestations, but are you surprised? If you are feeling good, you're not registering, right? So, but if not, the distribution was identical. So I think what I really would love in my biggest dreams is I think what we need to create is an environment of value, where the patient feel that they are valued for their input and where the researchers feel that they're valued for their input. And then everything goes by itself, I think. And creating face-to-face meetings such as this, where you look people in their eyes and where you say, what can we do together? And give a very concrete example. We have organized this Synodos Consortia, as I said before, which is we impose that people, scientists, clinicians, patients, translational scientists, everybody has to be in the room and they have to work together. Now you can imagine the first time we asked that, people asked, and they have to share their real raw data from the lab with the data hub. So the first time we aired that idea, I can tell you that many people asked whether I was crazy and I said yes. So what we did is we had the patient that kicked off every Synodos team. So first of all, just to give you an idea of the image, you had that face-to-face meeting of people that feel that they have to work together but are kind of. The patient tells his personal story. You saw the body language change in the room. And I think one of the things that I would love to invite is the media. We have to make more publicity about success stories where patients are engaged into the research community and researchers feel the value of having the patients into their community. We have to get the media. Next year, for our 10th anniversary, we need journalists in this room who write about this because there is honestly, a lot of misinformation out there in the media that I call that sometimes the Facebook science, where the scientists say, oh, they just cured disease XYZ. And it's not true. So we need journalists in this room next year who report about this amazing initiative that really pushes the research agenda forward and what that really makes a difference, but a realistic difference where, no, we're not going to cure cancer tomorrow or next week, but we are on a path and we're making a real difference. And I think that is kind of align our expectations between researchers and patients would be a very important thing.
Excellent. Well, can I say on behalf of the audience, the panel, you've done a fantastic job for us this afternoon, helping us to explore the different ways the models of collaboration are evolving, could evolve, the ways that they could be shaped more both to the needs of the population and the expectations of patients. So thank you very much to our panel.